Hola y bienvenidos a la clase de español. This lesson is on conjugating ER and IR verbs in the present tense. A quick review of what you already know about Spanish verbs. First of all, there are several groups of verbs in Spanish. The AR verbs, ER verbs, IR verbs, and then stem changing and irregular verbs. AR, ER, and IR refers to the endings of those verbs when they are in their infinitive, their most basic form. The infinitive is what you'll see if you look up a verb in the dictionary, and it means to whatever the action is. So for example, the AR verb hablar means to speak. You will want to review the video about AR verbs if you haven't done so already. And now we're moving on to those second two groups of verbs, which are ER and IR verbs. And we classify them this way because of the conjugation patterns that they follow. So, also other things that you know about Spanish verbs, each class of verbs has its own conjugation pattern. And conjugation, what we mean when we say that, is that we are changing the forms of the verb depending on the subject. So where the infinitive just means to speak, to write, to live, to play. When we conjugate it, it becomes I speak, you live, he plays. Again, before moving on, we're going to review the subjects in Spanish, the subject pronouns. So the way this is grouped here is we have two columns, singular and plural. And then we have three rows. The first row is the first person, which includes the speaker. The second row is the second person informal, the person that we're speaking to. And the third row is for third person, which is someone not involved in the conversation, él, ella, ellos, ellas. And the second person formal, the usted and ustedes. So remember that in Spanish, there are two different ways to say you, two different forms of the second person. The informal, which we would use to talk to someone who we know well, someone who's a member of our family, someone who's younger than us, anyone who we would speak to in a very familiar way. The formal, the usted and ustedes, would be for someone that we want to show a level of respect to, or someone who we don't know well. Continuing with a little bit of repaso, repaso de los verbos en AR. So AR verbs, such as hablar, tomar, comunicar, regresar, those are all AR verbs, and the endings that accompany AR verbs are o, as, a, amos, ais, an. So in the conjugated forms of tomar, which means to take, yo tomo, tú tomas, él, ella, usted toma, nosotros tomamos, vosotros tomáis, ellos, ellas, ustedes toman. So you'll notice we took the stem, the TOM, we removed the ending, the AR infinitive ending, and we replaced that with the ending that corresponds to each of the subjects. So now we'll do the same with the ER and IR verbs. So ER verb endings are o, es, e, hemos, eis, en. IR verb endings are o, es, e, imos, is, en. So you'll notice the only difference between the ER and IR endings are right here in the nosotros and vosotros forms. Hemos versus imos and eis versus is. So just like with the AR verbs, when we conjugate a verb, we will take off the ER or the IR ending and add the appropriate endings to the stem. So beber becomes yo bebo, tú bebes, él, ella, usted bebe, nosotros bebemos, vosotros bebéis, ellos, ellas, ustedes beben. And vivir becomes yo vivo, tú vives, él, ella, usted vive, nosotros vivimos, vosotros vivís, and ellos, ellas, ustedes viven. So let's look at these verbs in context, verbos en contexto. Mis hermanos beben muchos refrescos. So here we use the en ending because mis hermanos is third person plural, so we use that ellos form. beben. In the next sentence, en mi familia siempre comemos pizza para la Nochebuena. So the verb is comer, to eat, and because the subject is nosotros, we, I'm talking about my family and saying what we do, so I'll use the nosotros form, comemos. The next sentence, ¿qué comen ustedes para la Navidad? Because I'm asking all of you, more than one person. The subject is ustedes, so I conjugate the verb for ustedes, comen. The next one, there is no subject pronoun stated here, so you have to rely on the verb ending to tell who the subject is of the sentence, and this happens very often in Spanish. So here I see that the subject is yo because the verb is conjugated vivo. So this means I live. And because of the conjugations, because of the very specific conjugations depending on the subject in Spanish, it is very, very common to drop the subject pronoun. The next sentence, ¿y tú dónde vives? Because the subject is tú, we conjugate the verb vives. Where do you live? El estudiante escribe su nombre en el papel. The verb is escribir, to write. And we use the third person singular, the conjugation for él or ella, or usted, because the subject is el estudiante, the student, or he. Here, again, there is no subject pronoun, so we have to look at the ending to tell who it is. Escribes, that's the tú form, so I'm asking you. Do you write a lot in class? And the last one, again, there's no subject pronoun. We can tell that the subject is nosotros because of the imos ending. No interrumpimos la clase. So, a practicar. So let's look at this passage here. I'm going to read it through, and what we're looking for is words that we can tell are ER or IR verbs. Mi familia y yo vivimos en Idaho. Estamos muy contentos. Conocemos a mucha buena gente. Nos gustan los restaurantes. En el restaurante, mi esposo siempre come bistec, pero yo como pollo. Mis hijos comen macaroni con queso o hamburguesas. Para beber, bebo agua. Mi esposo bebe té helado y mis hijos beben té con azúcar o limonada. Most of these words you'll recognize because they've been part of this lesson already. So if we look at the first sentence, vivimos is the verb here. Vivimos, we live. And that's an IR verb with the imos ending. Estamos muy contentos. Here we have an AR verb, the verb estar. Estamos muy contentos. Conocemos a mucha buena gente. So look at conocemos, which is the verb here, and see if you can tell whether this is an ER or IR verb. Conocemos, we know, is an ER verb because of the emos ending. If it was an IR verb, the ending would be imos in the present tense. Nos gustan los restaurantes. We like restaurants. En el restaurante mi esposo siempre come, here's an ER verb, come, bistec, pero yo como pollo. So here we have the same word. In both of these cases, the verb is comer, to eat, but the conjugation is different because here the subject is mi esposo, and here the subject is yo. Then it changes again. The next sentence is talking about mis hijos, my children. So I use the ellos conjugation. Mis hijos comen macaroni con queso o hamburguesas. Para beber, here we have the infinitive of a verb, which you'll sometimes have depending on the context, to drink. Para beber, bebo agua. So who is the subject of this sentence? There is no stated subject, but we can tell from the o ending that the subject is yo, or I. Bebo agua. Mi esposo bebe té helado. So here again, where the yo conjugation was bebo, I'm using the el conjugation, bebe. Y mis hijos beben té con azúcar. So here, the ellos conjugation, beben. So keep practicing with these, get familiar with the patterns, and then look for ways to incorporate these conjugations into your speech and writing.